Good morning. 3 weeks ago on a Friday night, I was standing right here about to begin the late Shabbat, as I have for the past 25 years. It was 8:28 p.m., and I was just about to turn my phone off to start the service, and I looked down. There were a couple hundred people already getting ready to sit down, and I looked at my phone, and there was a text from our friend Melissa, and it said, "Wait for us. There are 200 people in line down the street all the way past Presidio Terrace. Please wait." And I just thought, wow. And I looked at Cantor Addie, and I had this big, goofy grin on my face, and she didn't even question it, because I always do that during the late Shabbat. Big, just happy, goofy grin. She didn't know I was so excited, and I looked to my left, and there was Rabbi Rena Singer and Rabbi Noah Westreich, and I actually started crying. There's 200 young adult Jews lined up down the street to get into the temple, to drink beer, to eat tacos, to hang out. Yes, for Torah. Yes, for Shabbat. But that's not the way it was when I was growing up in my 20s and 30s. Oh, I'm being told I have to take my jewelry off. Just this one? Now I feel like a pirate. Hold on, I'll take them both. My mother looks upset that I'm taking my jewelry off. It's not just the young adults. Thank you, Cantor. It's also, if you stay for the teen service, there are over 30 of our teenagers who are going to be leading Rosh HaShanah and Yom Kippur services, more than any other year before. It's in moments like these that I feel like a wildly unimaginable blessing is happening to us. Now, depending on your age, let me ask a question. Raise your hand if you've ever been to a late Shabbat. Okay, now turn around and look. Everybody turn around and look. How many people here have been to a late Shabbat? It's amazing. It's a mechaya. It's a miracle. Now, depending on your age, you might not have heard this story, but I grew up with this story, which is a story about a synagogue that gets infiltrated by mice, and they cannot get rid of the mice. And they set traps all over the synagogue. The mice keep coming. They get an exterminator to come. The mice keep coming. They finally get desperate, so they ask the rabbi. The rabbi's always the last person to be asked. And the rabbi said, "You should have asked me first." 2 days later, all the mice are completely gone. And they said to the rabbi, "What did you do? How did you get rid of the mice?" The rabbi said, "Well, I had them all come into the sanctuary. I gave them bar and bat mitzvahs, and they will never come back to the synagogue again." It's a funny, not funny joke because it was true for several generations. It's not funny because we're living through a period of time in our own history where many, many young Jews are also feeling they don't want to, and they can't return back home to the land of their souls, to their family of origin, or to the stories they learned about themselves and about Israel. We have just lived through a year which is different than any other in our lifetime as a Jewish community. I have to ask, why are so many young Jews lined up around the block? Why are so many people choosing Judaism as their spiritual path and home? Why are so many more Jewish babies being created? Why are so many people at this dire moment making aliyah? And why have so many of you, returned to this holy sanctuary? This year, we have experienced a pronounced and intense explosion of Jewish identity in every direction. I'll tell you what it has been like to stand here and say Kaddish in the Misha Beirach prayers every Shabbat. I literally was standing here as services were to begin, and someone ran up to me and said, "All you ever do is talk about Israel. Can we not talk about Israel on Shabbat? Please just give us a little space not to talk about Israel, Rabbi." I said, "Shabbat Shalom." Thank you for your opinion. And then I went to start, and somebody else ran up and said, I've been here 5 weeks in a row. All you do is talk about Israel. Israel, Israel. Can't you stop talking about Israel? Did I just say that twice? Thanks, Cantor. You have to talk about Israel, this one said. Every time, if we talked about Israel, it was too much Israel. And if we didn't talk about Israel, it wasn't enough Israel. Every single Shabbat. This year has penetrated all of our hearts and our souls and made us ask deep and at times scary questions about who we are. There have been times this year when I have been afraid to wear my kippah out into the world, and I've actually taken it off. And I've talked about it with people. One of our congregants said to me, you know, Rabbi Mintz, you can take your kippah off, but your face is a yarmulke. It's also why anytime somebody who didn't know they were Jewish and suddenly does 23andMe and they come up with the fact they're 11% Ashkenazi, they're like running around telling everybody and wanting to be wished a mazel tov. I think it's interesting. So I have to ask you right now in the sanctuary, where do you wear your Jewishness? Like, point to a place on your body where you feel most Jewish. Where is it? Point to a place. I'm seeing some people pointing to their hearts, some people pointing to their nose, some people are pointing to their hair, some people to a piece of jewelry. I saw some man point between his legs. We all wear our Judaism in different ways. Some of us have a mezuzah, a Mogen David, a chai. Some of us place a mezuzah on our doors or a Chanukiah in our window. And I think about what binds us as a community and our Jewish identity. To me, one of the most meaningful prayers we say together is the Ve'ahavta after the Shema. And I thought it was so beautiful when Cantor Addy had the Anshe Mitzvah class up here and said, are you nervous? And they said, yes. And she said, we can help them. And you prayed the Ve'ahavta louder than I've ever heard you pray it before, because you knew in that moment they felt a little spiritually vulnerable. We know how to show up. The Ve'ahavta says, love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. Take these teachings which I charge you this day deeply into your heart. Teach them diligently unto your children. Speak of them when you stay at home, when you're away, when you lie down, when you rise up. Bind them as a sign on your hand. Let them serve as a symbol on your forehead. Inscribe them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. The Ve'ahavta, we say it every single day. It's about being Jewish, wearing your Judaism proudly, publicly, intentionally, lovingly, and most importantly, about impressing it and sharing it with the next generation, with our children. It reminds me of the deep Jewish values we're responsible to pass down l'dor vador: justice, equality, shomrei adamah, being guardians of the earth, loving and defending the stranger, each human being created b'tselem Elohim, in the image of the divine. So this year we have to ask, what are we teaching diligently to our children? How could the events leading up to October 7th and the events that followed with this horrific war not in some way fragment or split our community? This year has birthed both a simultaneous pride and shame that we were not prepared to encounter, we are not able to process, and we are now only vaguely beginning to understand. This year, the shofar is also a blast which is not just inviting Jews in more deeply to our tradition, but it's pushing young and not so young Jews far away to a strange, even an estranged place of painful anguish for themselves, for their families, and for our entire community. In his book, which I consider the Bible of the High Holy Days, This is Real and You Are Completely Unprepared. Who's read it? Rabbi Ellen Liu's Bible. It's beautiful. If you haven't read it, it's a beautiful way to encounter the High Holy Days. He writes about the terrible and dark political tragedy that was unfolding in Israel and Palestine as he was writing the book 20 years ago in 2003. He wrote prophetically that he believed that whenever we read his words, whether it was 5, 10, 20, 30 years later, not much will have changed. He seemed to be acknowledging that from the very first murder, the fratricide, of Abel by his brother Cain in the book of Genesis, there's never been a time in the history of the Middle East and the Holy Land of lasting peace. We should not be shocked by the news of this week. We should continue to be horrified, but not shocked. Rabbi Liu writes that the one thing that has not changed and will not is the tremendous compulsion for historical vindication on both sides. And he equates and links what is happening in Israel and Palestine then and now to our own process of tshuva. He writes, I wonder how many of us are stuck in a similar snare. I wonder how many of us are holding on very hard to some piece of personal history that is preventing us from moving on with our lives and keeping us from those we love. I wonder how many of us cling so tenaciously to a version of the story of our lives in which we appear to be utterly blameless and innocent. Forgiveness, it has been said, means giving up our hopes for a better past. This may sound like a joke, but how many of us refuse to give up our version of the past and so find it impossible to forgive ourselves or others, impossible to actually act in the present? What I want Jews of all generations in this moment to remember is that our very core, in our hearts and souls, we are wrestlers, and we've continued to wrestle with the precious tradition for 4,000 years. Our name, Israel, means to wrestle with God. I don't care what anybody else says. It doesn't mean colonizer. It doesn't mean warmonger. It doesn't mean we're the only rightful inhabitants of the land. It doesn't. As Rabbi Singer taught us this morning about the Akedah, it is impossible to believe in a God that ruptures what we believe is our moral compass. From Abraham arguing with God in defense of Sodom and Gomorrah, to Jacob's struggle with the angel, Moses' argument with God in the wilderness, Miriam challenging God's appointment only of Aaron and Miriam as leaders, Jewish tradition does not shy away from challenging questions, from moral ambiguity, or from the deep tensions between the values we hold close and the world that we now inhabit. This is not the first time that deep rifts in our community have erupted. It will not be the last time. And I pray that we move through this period with not just scars that we all are feeling right now, but hopefully deeper wisdom, tenacity, and strength. So what does return look like for our people this year? What can tshuva offer us in this fragmented, vulnerable place of some deep misunderstandings with ourselves and each other? We have to create an authentic, meaningful, deeply human pathway back to one another, to conversations, to moving towards versus moving away from Jewish identity, especially when Zionism and the way it's perceived today is so controversial. Our tiny tribal family conflict, don't forget, is just a reflection of the rest of the world, what has become almost impossible to find common ground with which to even start a conversation on so many subjects here in this country, here in our families, here in our world. But listening, I believe, is the first step to understanding these next generations that are coming after us. The Talmud teaches silence is a fence for wisdom. And really, sometimes the Jews are not great at listening. We're better at talking. We're better at explaining and trying to convince, and we have a lot of opinions to share on this subject. We're not a quiet people. Over this past year, I've had many difficult and thoughtful conversations with many of you about this, but some of the most profound and difficult with my two sons, Elijah and Gabriel, about their Jewish identities and their relationship to Israel. It was very hard at first. It was frustrating because what I realized was that I was trying to convince them under the guise of having a conversation. I wasn't really listening, and we all knew it. Slowly, I've begun to listen more and talk less, be quiet, and not just jump in every time I disagree with a yes, but, yes, but, yes, but. Because the truth is, as we talked about and learned about our ancestors today, we are all about to become ancestors, and we are about to hand off that ancestry to the next generation. We have always been a diverse people with many ways to express our identity and our relationship with God. Are you welcome in this sanctuary if you don't believe in God? Of course you are. And over the years, many of you have shared with us your ambivalence and your struggle with the concept of God. If you can come to Rosh HaShanah and Yom Kippur services each year, which is literally God, 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 Melech, King, Sovereign of the universe, who determines who shall live and who shall die, if an agnostic Jew and an atheist Jew are welcome here, we should be able to tolerate and engage with Jews who deeply question our relationship to the state of Israel. I will admit it, I'm a Zionist, but I have been a struggling Zionist for most of my adult life. I love Israel deeply, and I share the pain and anguish and even the shame of what is happening there, not only in Gaza, but in Israel itself. If you were here last night, Rabbi Bauer shared with us that before October 7th, almost 85% of Israelis believed their country was in a crisis. And we cannot forget that for 39 weeks, hundreds of thousands of Israelis had taken to the streets to protest the way the prime minister had been misleading the country. If Judaism will never be a stagnant tradition, we need to recognize an important reality. The staunch Zionist, the somewhat Zionist, the anti-Zionist, the post-Zionist, never was a Zionist, ambivalent Zionist, youth, and other generations today are going to be the ones who determine the relationship between diaspora Judaism and what becomes of the next iteration of the State of Israel. Maybe some of us in this sanctuary will see that, but many of us will not be here when that new relationship is established. We have to keep teaching, exposing, talking, and even listening, but as time is passing, their values, the younger generation, their opinions and their moral compasses are going to be the real determination of the future relationship with Israel. So we have to find a way to honor all Jews' journey. We cannot afford to have a generation whose Jewish connection is compromised or cut off because of the way they relate to this concept that we know as Zionism. We can't. I asked my son Eli if he would be brave and write something, if he would even come up here and say it, and he said he would. So is it okay if I read what you wrote? Thank you, son. He wrote, "The Jewish values of tikkun olam, loving the stranger, and the pursuit of justice, which I learned at Jewish day school, Camp Tawanga, and here in this synagogue, inform my opposition to the war in Gaza and the ongoing occupation and subjugation of the West Bank. I was taught that we are all created in the image of God. This includes both Israelis and Palestinians. Both peoples deserve safety, dignity, and freedom. These values are the reason I believe American Jews need to demand our government condition aid and arms sales to pressure Israel to end these wars, secure the hostages, and begin a real peace process with the Palestinians. On these high holy days, I'm praying for the safety of innocent life, freedom for those in captivity, and the moral compass of our people." I think we can all agree with those prayers. Maybe not with everything he said, but he's a nice Jewish boy. And so's his brother. And so are most of our kids. And they're really, really struggling. And they feel like they've been pushed out, and there's not a way to come in and actually engage and talk. I want that so much. I want us to all be proud that that next generation is not walking out the door and not coming back. To all of you, those who are certain and those who continue to wrestle and struggle with our tradition, keep wrestling, keep struggling. Don't walk out the door. To those who are new Jews and those who are very, very old Jews, I say welcome home. Welcome to 5785. We have all returned. We love each other, and we're grateful to be here. You are not alone. You never were, and you never will be. You can be the talit, the Sukkat Shalom that we began with. You can offer it to one another. You can stand under it yourself. This tradition is 4,000 years young, like the rings of a tree. The years encircle us, wrap around us, turn us around and around until we are facing our beginnings and our endings. We all cry out in the call of the shofar because we don't know who will live and who will die. Perhaps someone we love. Perhaps it is our year. I set before you blessing and curse, life and death. Therefore choose life not only for yourself, but for all those Yoshvei Tevel, the inhabitants of this precious earth, whose birthday song we are now singing together on this day. We have all been here before. You are welcome here in our community as long as you can listen and open your heart with love. because we really need you. Our tradition encourages us, actually mandates, that we march and we pray and we vote and we stand up for others and ourselves and reach out to the other and forge a pathway back to your brother or your neighbor or your son or your daughter. Because your tshuva is a mitzvah, a commandment, a privilege, a rebirth, and a return. We are one. All is one. And if you believe in God, God is one. Finally, we are all also here on the precipice of the new year for a little bit of beauty, of sweetness, and of hope. So I want to leave you with just that, a poem by Alden Solovey. Let us dream wildly unimaginable blessings. Blessings so unexpected, blessings so beyond our hopes for this world, blessings so unbelievable in this era that their very existence uplifts our vision of creation, our relationships to each other, and our yearning for life itself. Let us dream wildly unimaginable blessings, a complete healing of mind, body, and spirit, a complete healing for all, the end of suffering and strife, the end of plague and disease, when kindness flows from the river of love, when goodness flows from the river of grace, awakened in the spirit of all beings, when God's light, radiating holiness, is seen by every person. Let us pray with all our hearts for wildly unimaginable blessings, so that God will hear the call to open the gates of the garden, seeing that we haven't waited, that we've already begun to repair the world in testimony to our faith in life, our faith in one another, our faith in the Holy One. Blessed be God's name. Amen. Shana Tova.